I started hiking to clear my head. Life had been feeling heavy for a while, work stress, bills, the usual. I wasn't trying to run away from anything, just trying to find space to think without everything pressing in all at once. The woods gave me that. I liked the simplicity of it. Wake up, walk, breathe, rest, repeat. No phones buzzing, no screens, no noise except the wind in the trees and the crunch of dirt under my boots. I'd been building up my mileage for a few months. Nothing serious, just weekend hikes, solo mostly. I didn't like being in big groups. Too much talking, too much planning. I liked the quiet. I liked not needing to explain where I was going or when I'd be back. So that spring, I took a Friday off work and headed into a forest preserve I'd read about online. It was supposed to be pretty low traffic, off the radar compared to the bigger parks in the region. No campgrounds, no facilities, just old trails and a couple of unmaintained fire roads that wound through the hills. It was about a 3-hour drive. I had packed light, one-man tent, small stove, dried food, just enough to be out 2 nights. I parked off a dirt pullout near a closed gate and hiked in with everything on my back. It was cool that morning. Gray skies, light breeze, no rain. Everything felt still and calm. The trail started wide, easy to follow, then narrowed as the woods thickened. There was a steep ridge to the west and a low creek valley to the east. I followed the ridge trail first, planning to loop down through the valley the next day. About 5 miles in, I stopped to take a break on a flat outcropping that overlooked the treetops. I dropped my pack, sat on a sun-warmed rock, and ate some trail mix while watching the wind push through the branches below. It felt like the first time I'd exhaled all week. I sat there for maybe 15 minutes, not moving, just listening to the distant rustling and letting my shoulders loosen up. When I got moving again, I felt good. I pushed another couple of miles into the woods, just me and the sound of my boots. The trail had faded by then, barely more than a game path weaving between trees and stumps. Still easy to follow with a bit of attention. I found a spot to make camp in a small clearing, just big enough for my tent. It was about an hour before sunset. The ground was soft but dry, pine needles blanketing everything. I set up the tent, gathered some sticks for a tiny fire, and heated up a pouch of chili. Nothing fancy, but warm food hits differently when you're out in the middle of nowhere. It got dark fast. The clouds above were thick, blocking any moonlight. I sat next to the fire until it burned down to embers, then crawled into my sleeping bag. I remember lying there, staring at the roof of the tent, thinking how quiet it was.
No planes overhead. No dogs barking.
Just trees shifting in the dark. I fell asleep fast and didn't wake up once that night. The next morning, I packed up early and followed the trail down into the valley. The descent was steep, roots and rocks hidden under the leaves. I took my time, using a trekking pole to keep steady. The creek at the bottom was narrow and shallow, more of a trickle than a stream, but it was cold and clear, and I refilled my bottles and sat for a while just soaking my feet in the water. That stretch of trail was even more faded than before. A few broken branches marked the way, but most of it was just intuition and memory from the map I'd studied before heading out. I knew the trail would loop back around the ridge after a few miles, circling toward the car from the other side. I was about halfway through the valley stretch when I saw something strange ahead. At first, it just looked like a dark shape on the ground, maybe 20 yards off the trail, kind of like a log, but not shaped right. I stopped walking and squinted. The trees here were dense, and the light was patchy from the clouds overhead. I took a few steps forward, curious. My first thought was that it might be a deer, maybe bedded down or injured, but the shape didn't move. It just lay there, flat against the earth. I moved a bit closer, slowly, not making much noise. I got maybe 15 feet away when something about the shape clicked into place in my mind. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, lying face down on the ground. I froze. My brain couldn't process it for a second. Was it someone hurt? Sleeping? Then I noticed the shape of the body, too bulky, too irregular, like it had extra layers. That's when I saw the netting, bits of twigs and leaves woven into the outline. And then I saw the faint shine of glass, something small and round near the face. It hit me all at once. Ghillie suit. Someone was lying there, still as stone, covered head to toe in a camouflaged outfit meant to blend perfectly with the forest. He was pointed toward the trail, toward me. I couldn't see the eyes, but I knew he was watching. He had to be. Every hair on my arms stood up. I didn't move. My heart thudded in my chest, and I felt the burn of adrenaline start to rush through me. I was alone, deep in the woods, and someone was hiding just off the trail in full camo. Not moving, just lying there, watching. I stood frozen for maybe 5 seconds, maybe 10. Then I backed up one slow step at a time, never taking my eyes off him. Still no movement, not even a flinch. He was good. Whoever he was, he knew how to stay hidden. If I hadn't stopped when I did, I would have walked right past him without ever seeing him. Once I was back far enough, I turned and walked, deliberate, calm, but faster than before. My eyes scanned every patch of ground, every pile of leaves. I kept looking over my shoulder, but saw nothing. I took a long route back toward the ridge, cutting through brush and heading uphill. It was exhausting, but I didn't want to stay on the trail. I didn't want to pass near him again. I didn't even want to be in the same stretch of woods. By the time I reached the top, I was soaked in sweat. My arms were scratched from thorns and branches. My legs ached. I didn't care. I didn't stop. I just kept moving, eating up distance. I skipped lunch, drank water while walking. I didn't want to stop until I was back at the car. The sun was starting to dip when I finally saw the dirt road through the trees. My boots hit gravel, and I didn't stop until I was inside the car with the doors locked. I sat there for a few minutes, letting my hands stop shaking. I didn't call the police. I didn't report it. What would I say? That I saw a guy in a ghillie suit lying in the woods? He didn't threaten me. He didn't say anything. But I know what I saw, and I know what it felt like. He wasn't a hunter. There were no hunting seasons open that time of year, and no permits posted in the area. And besides, he wasn't holding a rifle. He wasn't doing anything that made sense. He was just there, waiting, watching. I kept replaying it in my head on the drive home. The way he lay so still, the way I almost missed him, the glass shimmer, probably binoculars or a scope. The whole thing made my skin crawl. I started to wonder if he'd been there long. Had he watched me pass earlier? Was he watching when I slept? The thought made me grip the steering wheel harder. I haven't gone back to that area since. I still hike, still camp, but I stick to better traveled trails now. Places where I'm not the only one out there. Places with trailheads and maps and other cars in the lot. I carry bear spray now too. Not just for animals, just in case. Some people don't get it when I try to explain. They laugh or shrug it off. Say it was probably just a harmless bushcrafter or a wannabe survivalist playing dress up. Maybe it was. But if you've ever been alone in the woods, really alone, and seen something like that, you feel it in your gut. That deep animal sense that something is wrong. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stopped to rest in that valley. If I'd sat on a log, looked the other way, and never noticed him. Would he have moved? Followed me? Waited? Or was I just one of dozens he'd seen that month? Just passing ghosts to him? None of us ever noticing? I don't know. I don't want to know. But I've never looked at the woods the same way since. I've done a lot of hiking in my life, mostly solo. I've had close calls with wildlife, gotten turned around in deep backcountry, even slept through a thunderstorm in a thin tent on a ridgeline once. But nothing ever got under my skin like the time I truly felt unwelcome out in the woods. I mean, not by nature or bad weather, but by other people. Hidden people. People who didn't want me there and made sure I understood it. This happened in Northern California about 6 years ago. It was one of those weekend trips that wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Nothing complicated. Just 2 nights in the forest, light pack, about 20 miles total. I had the route planned weeks in advance. It wasn't a popular trail, more like a local loop off a dirt road through mixed-use public land. Forest Service property. No rangers, no check-in stations, just backcountry. I brought a friend this time, Mike. We'd hiked together a few times, not often, but enough that I trusted him. He wasn't into long hauls or technical climbs. but he liked the quiet and didn't complain. He had some stuff going on with work and said he needed to clear his head. We agreed to keep it simple. No crazy elevation gain, no off-trail exploration. Just walk in, camp, walk out. The trailhead was nothing more than a wide pull-off from a Forest Service road, about an hour off the main highway. When we pulled up Friday morning, there were no other vehicles there, just us. We parked, geared up, and locked the car. The trail started easy, wide and level, pine needles soft underfoot, switchbacks down toward a river valley. It was mid-spring, but we didn't see a single person. No bikes, no hikers, nothing. The deeper we got, the quieter it became. After about 3 hours of steady hiking, we stopped for lunch near a bend in the trail. I remember thinking how untouched the place felt. No trash, no boot prints, no signs of recent use. Then we started noticing little things. Off to the side of the trail, maybe 30 yards out, there was a piece of torn blue tarp tangled in a bush. Not flapping around, not bright, just enough visible to catch the eye if you were looking hard. Later, we passed what looked like a black plastic irrigation hose half buried in dirt, stretching into the trees. It wasn't cut clean. It just ended, like it had been dragged or abandoned. Mike joked it looked like some homesteader setup. I didn't laugh. By the time we reached our planned campsite, a small flat patch near a creek fork, it was around 4 p.m. We set up the tents, filtered water, got the stove going. The weather was perfect. Mild breeze, birds chirping, no bugs. It should have been a peaceful night. It wasn't. Around dusk, we noticed something strange. A smell. Not strong, faint, almost masked by the scent of pine and soil, but definitely chemical. Like fertilizer. We looked around but didn't see anything nearby that could explain it. The wind might have carried it from somewhere uphill, we figured. Maybe someone was growing a few plants out here and had left their supplies behind. That kind of thing isn't unheard of in these parts. Not legal, but not rare either. We didn't really talk about it much. Cooked dinner, sat around a small fire until dark, then called it a night. Both our tents were maybe 10 feet apart under a big tree, near a bend in the creek that drowned out most distant sounds. I always sleep light in the woods. That night, I barely slept at all. It started with a sound just before midnight, branches cracking, not far from camp. Not the random pop of a tree settling or a squirrel. This was slower, heavier, footsteps. I sat up instantly, heart already beating fast. I listened, held my breath, trying to figure out what direction it came from. It wasn't close, maybe 30 or 40 yards off, but it moved steadily through the underbrush, circled wide, then stopped. I thought maybe it was a deer or a bear, but there were no snorts, no huffing, no animal sounds at all. Just the occasional twig snapping and long stretches of silence. It circled again, slower this time, just out of range of my flashlight beam. Then it stopped, and that's when the noise changed. I heard a click, soft, mechanical, followed by what sounded like a short burst of static. Then nothing. I stayed completely still, not daring to unzip the tent. My flashlight was in my hand, but I didn't want to shine it unless I had to. My ears strained for any hint of where it had come from. I thought maybe it was a radio or a walkie-talkie, but the only people who'd be using that way out here, in the middle of the night, were the kind who didn't want company. After maybe 10 minutes of silence, I heard it again. A soft pop, like a footstep landing hard on dry leaves, and then movement. But this time it was faster, still wide of the tents, but closing the loop. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I crawled out of the tent. Mike was already up. I could tell by his face he hadn't slept either. He didn't say anything, just nodded toward the tree line and made a motion with his hand. Someone had been there. We packed up fast, skipped breakfast. We were both trying to stay calm, but neither of us had to say it. We weren't alone. Someone had been close to our tents in the night, moving on 2 feet, circling, watching, and they hadn't approached. They hadn't spoken. They just waited. We got back on the trail, planning to cut the loop short and backtrack to the car. We didn't talk much on the way. Every time the wind picked up or a branch creaked, we stopped and listened. I kept checking over my shoulder. A couple miles out from camp, We reached a narrow switchback that cut across a slope. As we rounded the bend, I saw it. Something hanging from a tree branch about head height. A rope, thin, maybe parachute cord or something like it, tied in a loose loop around a stick. The stick dangled over the trail like a marker. It hadn't been there yesterday. We didn't stop. We pushed harder, moving faster, scanning the brush constantly. And that's when I started to notice them, fresh boot prints. Big ones, heavy soles, not hiking boots. These were flat-soled, probably work boots. They weren't heading in, they were heading out. Same direction we were, but we hadn't seen anyone. That's when it clicked for me. Whoever had been out there didn't want to be found. And they'd seen us long before we saw them. Maybe from the first hour we stepped off the road. Maybe even from the trailhead. By the time we reached the last mile, the wind had picked up. Everything rustled. Shadows moved constantly, played with my head, made me think I saw things in the trees. I stopped trying to tell what was real and what wasn't. I just wanted out. We reached the car just before noon. That junky-looking vehicle was still there, parked the same way it had been. No plate, just coated in dust. It didn't look touched, but it didn't feel abandoned either. I can't explain it, it just felt wrong, like a decoy or a warning. Something to remind you that someone else was out here. We tossed our gear in the trunk and got in. As we pulled away, I saw it. Something new, painted on a dead tree beside the turnout. Bright orange spray paint, just a single word. Nope, that wasn't there when we arrived. The drive back to the highway was silent. Mike kept scanning the mirrors. I kept expecting a truck to come flying up behind us. But nothing happened. We made it back to the highway, back to cell service, back to people. We talked about it later. We both agreed on the same thing. It was a warning. They wanted us gone. They didn't want to chase us, didn't want to threaten us openly. They just wanted us scared, shaken, gone. And it worked. We didn't report anything. What would we say? That someone scared us off in the woods without ever showing their face? That someone with radios or trackers or something else moved silently around our tents at night and left signs for us to find? Nobody would take that seriously. And honestly, we didn't want to go back near that area. Not even to give a location. We scrubbed the GPX file, tossed the hand-drawn map. Neither of us ever hiked that part of the state again. I still hike. I still sleep in tents. But I'm more careful now. I pay attention to the signs. Trash that's been stashed instead of left. Trails that are too clean, too perfect. Random hoses running off into the trees. We didn't stumble into an accident. We walked too close to something we weren't supposed to see. And they didn't want to hurt us. They just wanted to make sure we never came back. They succeeded. I've done a lot of solo hiking over the years. It started when I was in college and needed a way to clear my head from classes, roommates, and city noise. Once I got my first decent pair of boots and a used pack from a local gear shop, I started making a habit of taking weekend hikes. Nothing crazy at first, short trails, one-night camps. Then I slowly worked my way into more isolated spots. It wasn't about chasing danger or doing anything extreme. I just liked the quiet, the clean air, and how the world kind of shut off when I got a few miles out into the trees. That all changed for me during one hike that I still think about way too often. It was a few years ago now, but the way it played out stuck with me in a way that no other trip ever has. I've done maybe 100 hikes since then, but none of them ever felt the same. This one left a dent. I had picked a forest reserve that was about a 4-hour drive from where I lived. Nothing touristy, just a large stretch of public land that had some unofficial trails carved by local hikers and hunters over the years. The area didn't have a name you'd see in a guidebook. No marked entrances, just a fire road that cut into the woods and then disappeared into dirt paths. A few guys I talked to online had mentioned it for being quiet and underused, which was what I was looking for. I got there on a Friday around noon, parked my car just off the gravel road, locked everything up, and started walking. The weather was dry but cloudy, which I didn't mind. Cooler temps meant fewer bugs, and I had no plans to climb anything or fish, just hike, camp, hike back. Simple. The trail I followed started off wide and easy to read. winding slowly through a mix of pine and hardwood. Thick underbrush on both sides, soft forest floor. The kind of place where sound doesn't travel far. After the first few miles, I hit a fork. Left led to a stream and right followed a long ridge. I went right. I figured I'd cover more ground, maybe find a good overlook for a camp spot. It was probably 5 miles in when I stopped for a break. Sat on a flat rock, had some jerky, and drank water. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Not just regular forest quiet, but thick, heavy stillness. No birds, no wind, no rustling. I felt that before in the woods, usually before rain or when there's a big predator around, but it still put me on edge. I shook it off and kept walking. My goal was to make it to a spot I saw on a topographic map, a flat section just before the elevation picked up. Around 800 feet of gain over a mile. Not terrible, but steep enough to want fresh legs in the morning. I reached the flat spot a little before sunset. It was perfect, level ground, fallen logs for makeshift benches, and even a small clearing that let in some light. I set up my tent, made a small fire in a dugout pit someone had clearly used before, and ate dinner from a bag. Dried rice and beans. Not exactly gourmet, but it filled me up. After cleaning up, I sat for a while watching the fire and just listening to the forest slowly come back to life. A few birds, some distant movement, nothing unusual. I don't know exactly what time it was when I turned in, but the fire had died to coals and the sky was fully black. I got into my sleeping bag, zipped everything up, and tried to sleep. It didn't come easy. Something felt off. I kept thinking about that quiet I felt earlier. My brain wouldn't settle. Every crack of a branch outside my tent made me flinch. I told myself it was deer, maybe a raccoon. Typical forest sounds. But there was this weird rhythm to it, slow, deliberate movement. Not the kind of shuffling you'd expect from an animal, more like something cautious, calculated. Eventually, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to early light coming through the fabric of my tent. A dull gray, filtered through cloud cover and trees. Everything looked undisturbed. I stepped out, stretched, made some coffee over my small stove, and tried to shake off the weirdness from the night. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing had been touched. But the feeling was still there, just under the surface. I packed up and started the climb up the ridge. It wasn't long, but it was steep, with switchbacks and loose dirt. I took my time, stopped often, and made sure I stayed hydrated. When I got to the top, I was rewarded with a great view. Rolling hills covered in green, a narrow river glinting far off in the valley below. I stood there a while, feeling better. I thought maybe I was just spooked for no reason. It happens, especially when you're alone. I started down the other side of the ridge around midday. This section of the trail was narrower, less traveled. The brush was thicker, and at times I had to push branches out of my way. I saw old tracks in the dirt, boot prints probably from a few weeks ago. Nothing fresh. It was mid-afternoon when I stopped again. I found a flat rock near a bend in the trail and pulled out some trail mix. I was sitting there chewing, just staring into the trees across from me, when I saw it. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Just a patch of forest. Trees, fallen logs, leaves, nothing strange. But something didn't sit right. My eyes kept getting pulled to the same spot about 40 feet away. There was this shape, a bulk, slightly different color than the surroundings. My brain kept telling me it was just brush, but the longer I looked, the more I saw it. It was a person, lying prone on the ground, wearing a full ghillie suit. He was facing me. He wasn't moving, not even a twitch, but I could see the way the fabric puffed around the arms, the unnatural bulk of the torso, and what sealed it, the faint shimmer of a glass lens peeking through the netting where his eye would be. My mouth went dry. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I sat there, completely still, just watching him. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me staring, him unmoving, but eventually I reached for my pack as slowly as I could. I didn't break eye contact. I didn't want to lose track of him in case he moved. Once my hand found the strap, I pulled the pack onto my lap, then slowly stood up. Still no movement. I started walking backward. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. Every step was deliberate, I didn't turn my back. I just kept retreating step after step until I was around the bend in the trail. Once I was out of his line of sight, I bolted. I ran as fast as I could, legs slipping on the dirt, my pack bouncing. I didn't care. I just needed distance. I don't know if he followed. I never heard footsteps, never saw him again. But I didn't stop running until I got to the fork in the trail near the bottom of the ridge. At that point, I ducked off the main trail and hid in the brush for almost an hour, just crouched there, trying to listen, trying to decide if I was being followed. I didn't hear anything. No movement, no voices, no footsteps. Eventually, I stood up and kept moving. Not toward the camp I had planned for the night. No, I took the long way back toward the car. It added maybe 4 miles, but I didn't care. I needed to be out of that forest. When I finally saw the gravel road, I nearly cried. I practically sprinted the last quarter mile to my car. Everything was intact. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time just breathing. I don't know what he was doing. He didn't have a weapon visible. Not that I could see. But I know what I saw. That wasn't a hunter. That wasn't some paintballer or survivalist out messing around. He was watching me, motionless, waiting for something. And the way he blended into the forest so perfectly, if I hadn't stared as long as I did, I never would have noticed him. It scares me to think how many times people like that go completely unnoticed. How many times they watch and wait, completely unseen. I never reported it. I didn't know what to say. Hey, there's a guy hiding in a bush wearing a sniper suit? What would that even do? There are no rangers in that area, no patrols. It's public land. For all I knew, he had every right to be there. But so did I. I haven't gone back since. I still hike, still camp, but I pick different spots now. Places with ranger stations, marked trails, a few other people around. I don't take risks the same way I used to. That trip shook something loose in me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't looked up when I did. If I had taken a nap there or stopped longer or turned my back. Maybe nothing. Maybe he would have just stayed there, hidden until I moved on. Or maybe he was waiting for a different moment. I'll never know. But I do know this. The woods aren't empty. And sometimes, even in the middle of nowhere, you're not alone. I used to spend a lot of time outdoors during the summers, especially in my early 20s. That time of life when you've got energy, some freedom, and no real fear of anything bad happening. I lived about an hour and a half away from a big forested area that had a good mix of hiking trails and bouldering spots. It wasn't a national park or anything fancy, just a big stretch of forest that had a reputation among local climbers and backpackers for being a solid place to get away for a few days. My friends and I would go out there for weekends at a time. We'd drive up Friday evening, set up our tents near the main bouldering clusters, and spend the next 2 or 3 days scrambling on rocks, exploring new problems, and just enjoying being off the grid. There was no cell service, no facilities, and no rangers or patrols. Just raw woods, long dirt paths, and the occasional scrappy climber or camper who had the same idea as us. The 3rd or maybe 4th time we camped out there, something weird happened. We didn't talk about it much at the time because we were all kind of in denial about it, and none of us wanted to make a big deal out of what we hoped was nothing. My friend Jess had left her gear outside her tent one night. That was normal, we all did it. The climbing gear itself wasn't cheap, but it was bulky and annoying to sleep next to, and nobody ever worried about theft out there. We were the only group around, as far as we could tell, and the last people we saw were heading out earlier that day. That night was completely uneventful. Clear skies, no wind, and we just sat around the fire talking, eating trail mix, and watching the flames until we got tired enough to crash. The next morning, Jess realized some of her stuff was gone. Her climbing shoes, a few clothes from her bag, and an entire chalk bag. She swore she had put them right by her tent flap, and we all remembered seeing them there. But when we looked around, there was no sign of any of it. No boot prints, no torn fabric, no marks on the ground. Just gone. We told ourselves she must have left the stuff over by the boulders somehow, or maybe set them down at one of the other campsites we'd wandered through earlier that evening. Maybe some animal dragged it off. None of it made much sense, but we didn't press it. Looking back now, we were probably too quick to brush it off. At the time, we didn't want to accept that someone might have been out there with us, sneaking around our tents at night, close enough to reach in and grab stuff without waking anyone. We left later that day. It was a bit of a downer, but we didn't dwell on it. The rest of that summer we climbed elsewhere, and it wasn't until the following year that we returned to that same spot. It was late July when we went back. The forest looked the same as always, dense, peaceful, with a thick wall of green that seemed to swallow sound. We were excited to be back. It had been a long winter, and we'd all been itching to camp again. We got to the forest a bit later than planned, so by the time we parked the car, hiked to the site, and got our tents up, the sun had already dipped behind the trees. We got the fire going quickly and cooked up some instant noodles, then just sat there letting the heat soak into our legs. We didn't talk much about Jess's stuff going missing the year before. I think we'd all mostly forgotten about it, or maybe just didn't want to revisit it. There were 5 of us that time: me, Jess, Darren, Meg, and Caleb. We were laughing, eating, messing around with the fire, burning dried leaves and pine cones like kids. The campfire gave off enough light to see our immediate area, maybe 15 feet around us, but past that was just pitch black forest. There was no moon that night, just a thick blanket of stars above us. I remember how quiet it was. No wind, no birds, just the occasional snap of a stick in the distance that we assumed was a deer or a raccoon. At one point, after sitting for hours, I stood up and wandered away from the fire to relieve myself. I didn't go too far, maybe 30 yards from the camp, just out of sight behind a big tree. As I finished and zipped up, I turned to head back and caught movement out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was an animal, low to the ground, slinking through the brush. But then I realized it wasn't moving like an animal. It was too smooth, too deliberate. I squinted, trying to adjust to the dark. That's when I saw it clearly. There was a person lying on the ground, completely prone. They were in a full-on ghillie suit, those camouflage outfits that snipers wear, with the leaves and netting that make them blend into the forest. They were laying on their stomach, head up, pointed directly toward our camp. Just watching, I froze. My heart was thudding in my ears, and I don't even think I breathed for a few seconds. My mind was trying to make sense of it, but nothing logical was coming. He hadn't noticed me yet, or at least it didn't look like it. I just stood there behind a tree, barely peeking out. Then, almost too quickly, he turned his head. He saw me. His whole body twitched like he'd been hit with a jolt of electricity, and then he bolted. Not back toward our camp, not toward the trails, just off into the trees, fast and silent. I stood there for a few more seconds, trying to decide whether I'd really seen what I thought I saw. My stomach was in knots. Eventually, I walked back to camp, trying to act normal. I didn't say anything to the others. I wanted to. I really did. But I knew it would set everyone off, and it was already late. Maybe it was some hunter. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. I told myself I'd bring it up in the morning, but I didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside the tent had my eyes open, heart pounding. I kept thinking about how close he had been. If I hadn't gone off when I did, I never would have seen him. And how long had he been lying there? The next morning, everyone acted normal. I didn't mention the guy in the ghillie suit. I kept watching the trees, scanning for any signs of movement, but saw nothing. We climbed for a few hours, but I was completely distracted. When we packed up to leave later that afternoon, I finally told Jess about it. She went quiet, then said, "Maybe that's who took my stuff." We didn't talk about it much on the hike back to the car. Everyone was on edge. Nobody cracked jokes like usual. I think we all knew, deep down, that something wasn't right out there. Someone had been watching us. For how long, we didn't know. We never went back to that spot again. In fact, that was the last time I went camping without checking if the place had some kind of ranger presence. That feeling of being watched, of knowing there was someone hiding in the dark just a few feet away, never really left me. It was too real, too specific to brush off as a fluke. I think about it a lot more than I'd like to admit. Sometimes I wonder how often people are watched without ever realizing it. How many other nights had that person been out there with us, just lying in the dark, completely still? It's been years now, and I still get chills when I remember that moment. The image of him laying there, the leaves stuck to his suit, his head raised just enough to look into our firelight. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't some harmless prank. Someone had been there with us, and they didn't want to be seen. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't spotted him, but I'm glad I did. I had been out camping for years, and I always preferred to do it solo. Not because I didn't like people, but because I enjoyed the quiet, the stillness of the woods, and the way the air felt cleaner when I was deep in it. I didn't do it for social media or to brag. I did it because I liked being far away from everything. No traffic, no phones, no forced small talk. Just me, a fire, and a patch of land under the stars. It was early September, just after Labor Day, so most of the summer campers had cleared out. I chose a spot about 2 hours off the main highway in a stretch of dense forest that used to be a logging area years ago. You could still see old trails where trucks once ran and rusted scraps of machinery buried under years of moss and leaves. It wasn't an official campground. No fire pits, no rangers, just trees, wildlife, and the sound of wind weaving through branches. I parked my truck behind a small rise, packed up my gear, and hiked in about a mile to where I'd found a flat spot near a small creek. I camped there before. The water was clean, the trees were spaced just enough to hang a tarp, and the forest felt still, like it had forgotten time. I got everything set up. Tarp strung high, sleeping bag laid out on a foam pad, small fire pit made with stones I scavenged nearby. I collected firewood for a couple hours before the sun dipped behind the trees. Then I lit the fire and sat back with a small bottle of whiskey and a bag of jerky. That first night was quiet, peaceful, everything I wanted. The second day passed the same. I spent time walking through the trees, checking for mushrooms, gathering kindling, and just listening to the woods. I didn't bring much food on purpose. It forced me to slow down and do small tasks. Felt good, kept my mind clear. I saw a few deer, a raccoon, and even a black bear across the creek, though it wandered off before I could get a good look. That night, the fire crackled low, and I slept early. It wasn't until the third night that things started to feel strange. I'd gone to bed around 9 p.m. It had been an uneventful day, and I was tired. I must have fallen asleep quickly, but something woke me up maybe a couple hours later. I don't wear a watch when I camp, but I guessed it was sometime around midnight. The fire had burned low, just red coals glowing under ash, and the forest was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, nothing. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was the kind of stillness that presses in on you, the kind where your body senses something your ears and eyes haven't caught yet. I lay there, frozen, eyes half open, ears straining for anything. I thought maybe it was a coyote nearby, or a bear circling the camp. I reached slowly for the flashlight I kept near my sleeping bag, flipped it on, and shined it toward the edge of the tarp. Nothing. Still, I had the itch. That old feeling I only get when something's not right. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night, just dozed in and out, listening hard, waiting for something to make itself known. But the woods stayed quiet. Next morning, I got up and checked the area, walked a wide circle around the camp looking for prints, droppings, broken branches, anything. I found one boot print near a patch of soft ground behind my tarp, but it was old, I told myself. Could have been mine from 2 days ago, or from 100 weeks back. I stayed anyway. I convinced myself it was just nerves, that I'd gotten too used to peace and was letting my brain play tricks. I kept busy the whole day, but every few minutes I'd stop and listen, waiting for something to shift in the quiet. That evening, right before sunset, I heard a sound far off, something like metal clinking, like a chain hitting a truck bed, came from deeper in the woods. I froze. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. I stood there for a while, eyes fixed in that direction, but it never came again. Still, it added to the unease building in me. I decided to keep the fire going longer that night. I gathered more wood than usual and kept it burning even after I laid down. I figured light might keep animals or people away. The heat felt good, too. I stayed awake longer than I meant to, sipping what little whiskey I had left, ears tuned to the woods. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, careful, trying not to be heard, but steady. I lay there, still, the fire casting light in flickers across the tarp and ground. I didn't move, just waited. The steps stopped maybe 30 feet from me. I could barely see the edge of the woods past the firelight. Nothing moved, but I knew someone was out there. I felt it. My heartbeat had crawled into my throat. I had a knife in my bag. Nothing big, just a carbon steel blade I used for fire prep. I eased it out slowly, kept it close, and stayed down. I didn't shine my light. I didn't want to reveal I was aware. Whoever it was stayed there for maybe 10 minutes. Long enough that I started to wonder if they'd slipped away. But then the footsteps started again, this time circling the camp. Soft crunches in the underbrush. They stopped every few seconds, like they were checking for a sound, waiting for me to move. I didn't. Eventually, the steps faded into the woods. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat up, back against a tree, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the fire. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed up everything fast, stuffed it into my backpack, and doused the fire completely. I didn't care about trash or leaving things behind. I just wanted out. As I started hiking back to my truck, I kept looking over my shoulder. The woods didn't feel the same anymore. They felt smaller, closer, like they were holding something between the trees. I made it back to the rise where I'd left my truck. Except something was off. The driver's door was cracked open. I know I locked it. I always do, even out here. I rushed down the slope and saw the back hatch had also been popped. Nothing inside looked gone, but everything was moved around, tossed. On the passenger seat, there was a small paper bag. Looked like the kind you get from a gas station. I picked it up, opened it. Inside was a small Ziploc bag with white powder in it. And on the bag, written in blue marker, were the words, "I'm looking to be a customer if you got good shit." I just stood there, staring at it, not touching the bag, not wanting to think too hard about what it meant. But my gut twisted hard. This wasn't someone random stumbling into my sight. This wasn't a mistake. Someone was trying to send a message, and they'd been watching me. I dumped the bag onto the ground, kicked dirt over it, and got in my truck. I locked the doors immediately, started the engine, and didn't stop driving until I hit the main road. Even then, I kept checking my mirrors. I drove straight to the next town over, a small place called Long River. I found a motel, checked in with cash, and spent that night behind a locked door with the blinds drawn tight. I couldn't sleep, but I needed time to think. I played the whole trip over in my head again and again. How long had they been watching me? Since the first day? Did I wander too close to something? An operation hidden out there? It made sense now. The metal sounds in the woods, the footsteps circling the camp, the sudden silence at night. Someone had a setup out there. Maybe drugs, maybe something worse. And I'd camped right near it without knowing. Maybe they thought I was a rival, or maybe they thought I was a buyer. Either way, they got close enough to my camp to check me out. Too close. I drove home the next morning and didn't talk about it. Didn't call anyone. I didn't want to explain anything. I just wanted to put distance between me and whatever that was in the woods. I threw away the tarp and sleeping bag. Tossed my boots, too. I didn't want any part of that trip lingering around. I still go camping now and then, but I stick to campgrounds. Places with other people around. Places with rangers and rules and cameras at the entrance. I miss the solitude sometimes, but I remind myself there's a reason we call it the middle of nowhere. Because out there, you're on your own. And sometimes someone's watching, not because they need help, not because they're lost, but because they think you are, and they're just waiting to see what you'll do next. It's been a few years now since that night in Colorado, but I still think about it all the time. I never really talked about it much, not because I didn't want to, but because the moment you start describing it to people, they kind of give you this half smile like you're exaggerating or just trying to tell a good campfire story. But it wasn't that. It was real, and it was one of the most disturbing things I've ever lived through. We weren't really hiking that weekend. It was more of a car camping trip. 8 of us, 3 guys and 5 girls. Good friends, tight-knit group, people I've known for years and trust with my life. We were out on BLM land south of Gypsum, Colorado. Not a park or a campground, just a stretch of public forest that's technically open for dispersed camping. No amenities, no other people, no cell signal. We picked it specifically because of that. To get to the spot, you had to drive something like an hour and a half down a Forest Service road. It started as gravel, then turned into rutted dirt, and then eventually just looked like 2 deep tire tracks disappearing into trees and scrub. There were no other turnouts or trailheads along the way, and we didn't pass a single car coming in. That's part of why we picked the spot. This was supposed to be one of those perfect off-grid weekends where you see nobody, hear nobody, and can just exist out in the middle of nowhere without distraction. And that's how it felt at first. We pulled in mid-afternoon. 3 cars full of people, gear, and coolers. The site was a small clearing with just enough space for all of us to set up tents and still have a central area for the fire and chairs. Trees wrapped around us on all sides. From that point on the road, you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction through the brush. It was remote in the purest sense of the word. The kind of place where the only light at night is from your fire or your headlamp. That first part of the evening was exactly what we wanted. We set up our tents, got a fire going, cracked some beers, and made food burgers, foil packets, roasted marshmallows, the works. The air was crisp, the fire was warm, and the sky was completely clear. You could see stars edge to edge, which is one of those things you don't realize you miss until you're back under them. You could hear coyotes in the distance, but nothing closer than that. Just wind in the branches and the occasional crack from the firewood. We'd parked the cars about 30 yards off from the tents, close enough that we could get to them if needed, but far enough that they weren't crowding the main area. They were parked parallel, not nose in, kind of boxed in by trees, but nothing crazy. We left a little space between each one so we could grab things from the trunks or sleep in them if the weather turned. After dinner, we cleaned up really well. We'd camped in bear country before, and everyone knew the drill. Food locked up, wrappers packed away, no trace. Around 9:30 or 10, we started packing it in. It had gotten cold enough that everyone was huddled closer to the fire, and most people were getting tired. We decided to make one last quick trip to the cars to grab sweatshirts and whatever else we needed before heading to the tents. I remember this moment so vividly. We were laughing, joking about how cold it was getting, and then someone ahead of me just stopped walking. Not dramatic, not yelling, just froze. And then the others stopped too. I came up behind them and saw why. The front right tire on each of the 3 cars had been slashed. Same spot on all of them, right on the sidewall, clean slice. Deep enough to flatten the tire completely, but not so deep that the tires looked shredded. First, nobody said anything. We just stared. Then I remember someone saying, "Is this a joke?" But even then, nobody laughed. Because even before we started processing it fully, we could all feel it in our guts. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. Panic doesn't always hit like in the movies. It creeps up your spine in layers. First, you look for a reason, a mistake. Maybe the tires hit something sharp on the way in, but then you remember how slow and careful we drove, how nothing was near that side of the trail, and then it hits you that the cuts were too precise, too identical. No rocks do that. Then you realize how far you are from anyone, how you haven't seen another soul in hours, how the nearest pavement is almost 2 hours away on foot, and how, somehow, someone had come close enough to each of our vehicles to do this without making a single sound. We stood there in a tight circle, facing out. I could hear breathing. Someone dropped a water bottle, and it echoed way louder than it should have in the quiet. One of the guys, probably the calmest of the bunch, immediately went to his car and started digging in the back seat. He came out with a handgun. Legal. Trained. He didn't wave it around or anything, just held it low, scanning the trees. From that moment on, we were in motion. No discussion, no arguing, just moving. We all had spares, donuts, nothing long-term, but they'd get us to the highway. People split off to start jacking up the cars and swapping out the flats. Others kept flashlights moving across the tree line, scanning. Everyone was jumpy. Every crack of a branch made heads snap. Nobody wanted to admit it out loud, but we all knew whoever slashed those tires could have still been out there. watching. And that was the worst part. The watching. Because whoever did this, they had to have been close. Close enough to creep between 3 different vehicles and cut those tires while we sat around the fire just 30 yards away. Close enough to see everything. Maybe hear us laughing. See which cars belonged to who. They had waited for the perfect moment, when everyone was distracted, and slipped in and out without a single trace. No footprints, no noise, nothing. We got the spares on faster than I ever thought possible. Not one of them was untouched. All 3 front right tires, like it was planned. Like whoever did it knew how to immobilize us just enough. If even one of us hadn't had a spare, we'd have been stuck. No signal, no help. Just woods in every direction and a long, dark walk to nowhere. We didn't stay a second longer than we had to. The moment those cars were drivable, we were out. We didn't stop to check if anything else was messed with. We didn't even pack up the tents, we just left them. Just got in the cars, slammed the doors, and peeled out. All 3 cars bounced and scraped down that dirt road way faster than they should have. Dust and branches flying everywhere. Even once we got a few miles down, nobody said a word. It was like we were holding our breath until we saw the highway. That thin line of asphalt with headlights rolling by like lifelines. When we finally had signal again, we pulled off and called the local sheriff and the rangers. Gave them the Forest Service road name, the coordinates from the GPS, everything we could think of. They were polite, but they didn't say much. Just that we did the right thing by leaving, and to be careful out there. They didn't promise to send anyone out. Didn't ask for pictures. Just said they'd make a note. We drove the rest of the way home mostly in silence. Everyone was rattled. And I mean deeply rattled. Not just scared in the moment. Shaken in a way that stuck with us for weeks. Months. Some of us had nightmares. One of the girls had a panic attack a few nights later when her car alarm went off unexpectedly. We didn't plan another trip for almost a year. When we finally did go out again, we picked a place with bathrooms and a ranger on site. It wasn't the same. I think what haunts me most about that night isn't what happened. It's what could have happened. Think about it. We were isolated. No cell service. 8 of us, yes, but 2 tents were pitched a little further out on the edge of the clearing. What if someone had been waiting for us to fall asleep? What if they had tried something worse than tire slashing? What if we hadn't noticed until morning? We didn't see a single person the entire time we were there. Not one hiker, not one camper, not one car. But someone saw us. Someone watched us. Got close enough to slash 3 tires and vanish into the trees. We still don't know who they were. Or why. Was it a warning? A message? A random psycho passing through? We'll never know. But I think about that moment sometimes, right before we walked up to the cars, when everything still felt normal. Laughing, full stomachs, warm firelight. We had no idea someone was probably out there in the dark, crouched behind a tree, holding a blade, waiting for their moment. Still makes my skin crawl.